Tevi, Troy, welcome. And this is a pleasure, and that we should be having the opportunity to chat on our nation's 248th birthday. That's really wonderful. So thank you for helping to make this possible.
I'm happy to do it. I love America. Love to do stuff with you. Happy birthday, America. May she live for many, many years into the future. And to think about it, 248, I mean, that's a quarter of a millennium almost. It's really an impressive achievement to have a democratic government, a representative of the people. And, a lot of nations have not lasted nearly as long. So we should be very grateful to America and for what she has accomplished.
I'm also grateful for our friendship. It's I don't even actually remember how it began, but I know we've been friends for uh, 25 years,
Longer.
longer.
We met in the late 1990s. I was working on Capitol Hill, first for Christopher Cox from California,
Oh
and
yes,
later from John Ashcroft from Missouri. And then I met and eventually married a woman named Cami Plisco, now Cami Troy, for almost 25 years. And we happened to get married in Seattle, where you were living at the time. And I wouldn't say we were that close at the time, but I invited you to the wedding because I had an affinity for you, and you had an honor at the wedding. And then you later, along with Michael Medved, hosted one of the seven blessings meetings, the Sheva Brachas in Hebrew, after my wedding. And it so happened that we didn't know that many people who could do that sort of thing out there. So the only actual Sheva Brachas we had besides
yes,
our wedding was the one that you and Michael put together.
yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
grateful for
right.
that. And I think that cemented our friendship.
That was so it is a long time. Well, I do value it, and I do want to talk about that a little bit with you as well. One of the interesting things about it is that not necessarily our friendship in particular, Tevi, but friendship in general. It's odd, as important as it seems to be. There is no mention of friendship in the five books of Moses. Nowhere in the Torah does it speak of friendship. What do you think of that?
Um, I mean, there is in the Tanakh, in the wider book, I mean, the friendship of David and Jonathan is very
And
powerful,
not
but it doesn't
interesting
end
enough,
well.
the word chaver, that word friendship, not used at all in that context.
Right, but they clearly do have a friendship, but there
Yes.
there are no real friends I could think of in the five books of Moses, and I think that's a really good.
Well, Judah had an interesting, seems to be something of a friendship with a guy in Lebanon.
Hiram? No.
Um, and but still, the word friend not used, and it's you really search far and wide, and I have an explanation for it that I'd like your reaction to.
I'd love to hear it.
Nowhere in the Torah does it discuss or describe anything that is automatic and natural. So, for instance, there is no requirement. And God spoke to the children of Israel, saying, "Thou shalt all eat regularly to avoid dangers of malnutrition." Right?
Yep.
Malnutrition is not a well known Jewish malady.
Indeed not.
Um, it's not there. Uh, the Torah discusses contractual relationships, husband and wife, siblings, much material about business relationships, everything that is anything and everything that is contractually it comes into being through contract is discussed extensively, but friendship not. And I believe the explanation is because, like eating, friendship is natural and inevitable, and so it doesn't need to be discussed. And it comes and goes. It's not as if it is structured by any set of rules.
Hmm.
And what is more, I go to the book of Job for some more interesting information on this. I've been very fascinated by this lately, where Satan says to God, let me have a go at him. So God says, yeah, all right, you're not gonna break him. Just leave him alone. Take his stuff. So Satan takes everything. Satan comes back and says, you know what? I'm sorry. We need to modify the terms of the deal. I do have to get at him. God says, fine. You can get at him, hurt him, give him pain, but you may not take his life. And then in chapter 2, bereft and utterly devastated, Job sits down for comfort with his three friends, and they bring him comfort. Was that something that Satan overlooked? Why didn't he take away his friends as well? He had permission to touch anything except to kill Job. So the only possible explanation is that taking away his friends would have killed him. And sure enough, the Talmud has an expression, either friendship or death. And so friendship, now we don't even exactly know whether Satan took his wife or not. But it is possible that the wife at the end of the story is the second wife. Either way, it seems that a person's very survival actually is thrown into doubt without any friends at all. That seems to me to be the message. So possibly without a wife, yeah, guys survive without wives. But do we survive without friends at all? I think not. And so it's an inevitability, barring weird circumstances that produce Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. By and large, people form friendships, even at the lower edges of society, even in the dark underbelly of the gangster world and the world of crime and violence. Friendship somehow exists on some level there as well. Even in the homeless encampments, scourges as they are on the cities of America, apparently people who have explored these places report that there are some kinds of friendship. So that is my explanation for why friendship isn't mentioned in the Torah. It's a completely natural inevitability about human relationships.
Well, I'll tell you why it resonates with me. Your explanation is that I treasure my friendships, and I don't think I could live without them. I certainly couldn't live a rich life without them. And I want to talk a little bit about optimism in July 4th during this conversation. I note that you and I right now are probably 50 miles away from each other, and we're talking with this immediacy and this intimacy where, 50 years ago, we couldn't do that. And I have many friends across the country that I stay in regular contact with. As you know, I have 4 kids. They don't all live at home, but I'm in touch with them every day because of modern technology.
Yes.
And just the ability to connect with people that are close to you is really a joy and something that we have today in a way that we may not have had in earlier generations.
Yes. No. It's a blessing, and it's really been an apparently an almost inevitable uh, arc of progress in that we find that every time there has been a technological development that has made it possible for human beings to connect more effectively, more quickly, more immediately, more reliably, it's always been accompanied by a huge jump in economic GDP. So whether it was steamships, I mean the Atlantic world was profoundly impacted by the arrival of steamships in the late 1700s, and railways, huge impact. Anything that moved people more effectively. Of course, the Victorian internet, as it was dubbed by an author, the arrival of the telegraph in 1844. Again, all of a sudden, people were able to convey information more quickly than a man riding on a horse.
Yeah, and new innovations spread more quickly. I mean, there's a story that the hamburger was invented by a Jewish person who ran the shipping lanes across the Atlantic, and he needed a cheap and easy way to feed people. And so he put 2 pieces of bread around a piece of meat, and apparently these first hamburgers were actually kosher, and the meat was sourced out of
I didn't
Hamburg,
know
and
that.
that's how it came about.
Who doesn't like a good hamburger?
It's true, especially on July 4th.
Especially today, right? July the 4th.
So.
Yeah,
So yeah, so anyway, I treasure our friendship. I'm thrilled to have opportunities to speak to you, even if we can't be in the same room, although I do enjoy our periodic lunches together in Baltimore as
I do
well.
too. Yeah, yeah.
So we did meet almost, I guess, 27, 28 years ago. When I was on the Hill, it was a different time. And I like to think about the 90s when people talk about how terrible things are today and people are in despair and woe is me, all the time. And in the 90s, it's not like we walked around and say, wow, everything's great. We have reached the apotheosis of the human condition. We were talking about, oh my gosh, Newt Gingrich, Bill Clinton, the president's slept with an intern. There's so much tumult in the world. What's going to happen? I mean, we thought things were kind of at the edge of a precipice. And now, when you talk to people about the 90s, they say, oh, it was a golden period. There was no war, it was peace, it was prosperity. So sometimes you don't recognize what you have in the moment. And even though we have a lot of problems today, and certainly there's some issues at the White House, and I don't like the fact that we're $30+ trillion in debt, and there are some countries that very much don't like us, including Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and China. But we're not in the US, at least currently, at war. The economy is stable, even if I think it could do better with better stewardship. We have these amazing electronic tools. Um, there are potential dangers with AI, artificial intelligence, but there's also potential great benefits. And I think sometimes on a day like July 4th, when we're celebrating our great country's 248th birthday, we should just take a step back and appreciate what we have rather than kind of wringing our hands and talking about all the problems that are manifest.
Gratitude is not just valuable in and of itself, but I've written on the way it becomes a gateway to optimism. The expression of gratitude. So, in essence, we're performing this profound public service, Tevi, by bringing alive a feeling of gratitude today, and there are so many things we do feel grateful for. Um, and pointing out that there's much to be grateful about in the United States of America even now. So yes, I mean it makes you and I feel a little bit more optimistic, and people with whom we'll share this conversation will feel more optimistic. There's no question about it.
Do you know what else gratitude brings about? Conservatism. People who are grateful for what they have tend to be more conservative. People who are liberal tend to want to they think too much in despairing terms, but B, they want to tear everything down. They want to get rid of the
revolution is a constant in the progressive mindset, the need
right.
to change, and that's not something that flows from a grateful mindset at all. A need to change is a way of saying how awful things really are, and you just wait till I get a chance to be in charge and fix things, then things will be better. But my favorite question to progressives is, describe an America that'll turn you into a conservative. At what point do you lose the revolutionary fervor? And of course, the true answer, as they scratch their heads, is never.
Yeah, well, then they'll never be happy, truly. So
Yes.
the other point, I wouldn't say I'm anti-revolution. There's one revolution I'm very much in favor of, and that's the American Revolution. And that's why conservatism in America is so different than conservatism in Europe. And what are they trying to conserve in Europe? A monarchy? Who needs that? But in America, we're trying to conserve the ideals of the American Revolution. And I think that's something that we can continue striving for.
Do you think people, when I say people, the crowd in America, do people appreciate how important the distinction between the French Revolution and the American Revolution is? Do people really get that these are two entirely different revolutions? They may have the same word, but they're not the same.
Well, that's the easiest question I've ever got because the answer is no. People don't appreciate, people don't think about it. Although I do like to think about the famous cartoon about someone who goes to a librarian and is looking for the French Constitution. And the librarian says, "Oh, you're looking in the wrong section. It's among the periodicals."
Yes, that's right.
But the American Constitution, we still have the same one, right? It's been around
It's
for 200
been
plus years. And
remarkably durable.
yeah, and we have some amendments, and most of them I'm okay with, not all, uh, it's a document that we look to and should look to for determining how to run a country and how to govern a society with diverse voices and different interests and different needs.
There are powerful people and influential people who genuinely and deeply want to rid America of the Constitution.
True, but
What
I'm
what
not a big fan of those people.
do you do you go beyond? To me, the reason they want to do that is because the Constitution confines and restricts their appetite for revolution and change.
And it also restrains government. There are things government can't do. There are rights that the people have
Exactly.
that are timeless. Uh, so yeah, I can understand if you want complete revolution and you want to tear down everything in society, the first thing you'd want to get rid of is the Constitution. What do you need that Constitution for? It's just a limiting document. But for us, it limits government's power and thereby preserves our freedom. And that's really what we're celebrating today.
As Stalin notoriously once remarked, I don't remember the exact context, but he was challenged on a Soviet policy, and his the person talking to him said, "The Pope won't stand for it." And his response, as you know, was, "How many divisions does the Pope have? In other words, how much military muscle does the Pope wield?" And the answer was nothing. How many divisions does the Constitution have?
Well, it doesn't have any actual divisions because there's no military might behind it, but it has this great country that's lasted for 248 years, and it has it has a special place in the hearts of right-thinking Americans. And I think it's something more powerful than military might. Every one of those divisions that Stalin bragged about, every single aspect of them, all the people in them, all the machinery in them, all the guns, the tanks, those are all gone now. None of them exist today, except perhaps some of the guns that are tanks in a museum. But the Constitution is still there. The idea of ordered liberty is still there. And I think that's much powerful than any short-term military division.
Jumping to Steve Bannon, who has just started 4-month incarceration. Do you feel that that is constitutional? How do you feel about it? Is it constitutional? Do you feel it's, yeah, what do you think?
Well, let's talk a little broader about this whole issue of lawfare. And lawfare is the criminalization of political differences. I don't like you and I don't like your political beliefs, so we're going to find to see if there's some way that we can go after you legally
Right.
and criminally. And I am opposed to that. Now, I don't want to get into the specifics of the Steve Bannon case because I didn't attend the trial, but it sounds to me like there may have been some fraud involved with how he was dealing with donors, and it had nothing to do with what he was doing in government. But in general, this idea that we don't like you, so we're going to target you and see what the law can bring about to put you in trouble is a real problem for me. Like the old idea that you can get a good district attorney can get a jury to indict a ham sandwich, right? Or Harvey Silverglate, who talks about was it 2 felonies a day? How everybody is committing felonies. You don't even know it because there's so many laws on the books. And many of them are selectively enforced, as we see from the prosecutors in places like New York and San Francisco. So I really don't want to see, as much as I dislike some political opponents, I don't want to see them jailed. I just want to see them voted out of power, and I want to see better policies in place.
And so what's changed? Why is it? And how has this change come about? Why is something that would have been unthinkable back in the 90s, the terrible 90s, unthinkable, and yet today it's being widely practiced by those in power?
Well, I think there's 2 major factors, and I'll talk about both of them. One is what we call the great sort. It used to be, I live in suburban Maryland. You might have a Republican next door, you might have a Democrat next door, but you didn't live with people who just thought like you. And now we have the situation where you've got these blue cities and the red rural areas, and people who don't like the way liberals think might move to Texas or Idaho, and people who don't like the way conservatives think they might move to New York or California, and they don't really interact with one another. There's a sense of the other, that the people who are not thinking like me aren't around me. They don't have anything to do with me. They're not part of my country. So there's the otherization of people by not having any interaction with them. But the second thing, and I think this is more important, I think will resonate with you as well, is the loss of religion. Religion used to be the most important thing. I mean, people used to fight wars over religious differences. I'm not advocating for that by any means, and they still do in some parts of the world, not in America. But when religion goes away, politics steps in and becomes the most important thing in people's lives. So now people don't say, well, I'm a Catholic and I just like you because you're a Protestant. They say, I'm a Democrat and I don't like you because you're a Republican. And it is the most important thing for me to see that you lose and you be defeated and you be humiliated and perhaps even imprisoned. So I think the absence of religion and the making of politics the religion of choice has been a real problem. And I think I really do think it's more of a problem on the left because the more religious people tend to be more conservative, and so they don't have to the same extent this absence in their lives, this kind of emptiness where they lack religion, so they can look to other things. That doesn't mean there aren't conservatives who engage in lawfare and try to get their political opponents. And I think it should go away from everyone from everywhere, and I just don't want to see that going forward. But it does seem to be more a phenomenon on the left.
When people fight about things like land, that's one thing. And it stands separate in my thinking, Tevi, because I can't really think of I can't think of a war that was fought over land. I think it's sheer folly to think that the Middle East problems are over land. They're over two conflicting belief systems. I think that although Hitler spoke about Lebensraum, Hitler did dream of the glorious German destiny on the steppes of Russia. In the final analysis, as comes out clearly in Goebbels' diaries and in Spandau diary, it really was a moral conflict. Hitler was without question and spoke openly about it, even in Mein Kampf. He was at war with the Judeo-Christian thinking world. And so I don't know, when has there been a war about things? And right now, we say it's not about religion, but about politics in America. And I want to make the case to you that it actually is about religion, because I don't know that politics is anything more than the practical application of our most deeply held religious values. Let me give you an example of what I mean, and then you tell me what you think. But that the left has gone to war to the greatest extent on transgenderism. It's quite fascinating to me, because you got to think that there must have been one or two eminent, older, wiser heads in the democratic political world. I can't think who they might be, but there must be someone wise there who said, calm down, boys and girls. America's really not ready for guys with beards wandering around little girls' bathrooms. So just tamp this one down. We really don't have to fight this now. We've won everything we've touched. Okay, we've won on abortion, we've won on homosexuality, on all the social issues. We've won, so just let this one live. But they couldn't do it. It had to be taken to the wall. And it's odd, because everybody knows that when a little girl thinks she's fat, we don't adjust her body, we adjust her mind. We sit her down with psychiatrists who explain to her that she's perfectly proportioned and she does not need to starve herself or do anything else at all, because her perception of herself is not correct. But when that same little girl says, I think I'm a boy, rather than I think I'm fat, all of a sudden we cut off her breasts and put her in the operating room. Why don't we do the same thing? And the only answer I have is because right at the beginning of the book that you and I both take our value system from are the famous words, male and female, he created them. And so I really do think that at root, this is a religious war. The political part is merely a practical overlay upon the underlying spiritual belief conflict. It's not a conflict about land. It's not a conflict about space or things. It really is a conflict about two fundamentally incompatible ways of looking at the important questions of how human beings can and should live in community with one another.
Well, I have two interesting reactions to that. Number one is there is a wise man on the left who has been talking about this. His name is James Carville, and he's constantly saying, "Stop doing this woke stuff, you crazy Democrats." And I find it very entertaining. He's
I don't
like,
know if he's wise or if he's expedient.
right, but he's just like this crazy guy screaming in the wilderness, and they're all ignoring
Yes.
him. So I
Yes.
find it very entertaining to see him get all worked up and increasingly melt down over the political unwisdom of the Democrats and the left for pursuing
Right.
this. But well, I agree with what you're saying. The side that is pushing transgenderism and all these other things, they have rejected religion. So it's hard to say their religious differences because these are people who reject religion, and their new religion is wokeism uh,
Well,
or
they
leftist.
oddly enough,
So,
to pardon me interrupting you, but I don't think that I agree with that. They haven't rejected all religion. They're actually remarkably and astonishingly comfortable with Islam. What they've rejected is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What they've rejected is the biblical perspective on reality, and that is profoundly. I haven't lost you, have I, Tevi? Yes, I have. There we go. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, are we okay? No, we're not. Oh dear,
you're disagreeing with me. Okay.
yeah.
Did you
Um,
drop the other Tevi Troy? I don't know what happened there.
I'm going to yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah, there we go. Good. All right.
Right, so you're saying you don't know that you agree with what I was saying about
Is
religion.
yes, and the reason is because they're perfectly comfortable with Islam. So not all religion do they reject. What they reject is literally the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the religion that built civilization, that built Western civilization. And this is why the attack on capitalism, which is also a product of biblical and Judeo-Christian thinking. It's not an accident that no capital market ever emerged indigenously in a non-Christian country. Never happened. Because the whole idea of money and its spiritual reality is a product of Judeo-Christian biblical thinking. So that is specifically what is up in play, and which progressivism's entire enterprise is to obliterate its role in human affairs, but not religion per se. Other belief systems are fine.
Well, I mean, this gets back to Alan Bloom and this whole idea of tolerance. You have to be tolerant of everything. And you know, intolerance is the worst thing. And intolerance is defined as actual religious beliefs or distinctions that you make that are based on regular human natural characteristics. So yes, there is something there, but I'm not so sure that they're okay with Islam. I think they're okay with Islam in an expedient way, like you were talking about James Carville. They're okay with anything that's trying to undermine the West and undermine Judeo-Christian civilization.
Yeah,
They would
yeah.
not be so happy living under Sharia law.
One would think not.
Right. No,
Yes.
no, we know not. However, they think it's more important to be for the thing that is against the West right now,
Yes.
while it's not really a danger that Islam is going to come stop them at Columbia University from having their fluid gender parties. But if they succeeded in getting rid of the West and something would fill the void, and it wouldn't be wokeism, and Islam probably was more likely to fill that void, and I think suddenly they'd be very unhappy.
What does the world they dream of look like, Tevi? American progressives, AOC, the squad. What does America look like as they work towards this dream?
Well, I always think of Atlas Shrugged before we see Gulch revealed. So in America, where the government takes what it wants when it wants in the purpose of making everything equal. And this whole idea of equity is not that you should have equal opportunities, but you should have the exact equal results for everyone, and the government should be determining who gets what. Now, as we know, and we've seen from the Soviet system, it doesn't work. But that doesn't mean that that's not what they're aspiring to.
Well, they don't mean it either, do they? There was never any intention that Al Gore should regulate his carbon output. There's somehow uh, an understanding superimposed upon the whole equality matrix that certain people are exempt from. In other words, I don't know the details right now, but I'm guessing that Congress is not subject to the same rules about medical care that the rest of the population is.
Or travel. I mean, these guys fly home every single weekend. I mean, think about the carbon footprint of that of doing that. So,
Yeah, so we already have allowed this idea that the rulers are exempt from the rules that they impose upon everybody else. And so it's not as if equality is the ultimate goal. It's part of the mechanism for selling the ultimate goal, but that there will, in their vision, that there will be a nomenclatura, some kind of elite upper body of rulers of which they naturally will be part. I think that's pretty uh, pretty locked in to their vision, is it
look,
not?
that's what they had in the Soviet system, right? Everybody was miserable except for the rulers who got their caviar and they had their dachas, and so um, it, it's not unheard of in human civilization that you have these kind of societies that try and make everyone equivalent, but at the same time, the rulers are in a different position. And look, it goes back to Animal Farm, right? Animal Farm said, so all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Yeah, right. I mean, the hatred for Trump started in 2015. Prior to that time, he was the beloved guy who fixed up the Central Park skating rink and so much else in New York. He was the guy who was able to take on the bankers of New York. Everybody loved Trump. He was invited to all the social events, and and I suspect that what began to produce the intense revulsion was his often declared plan of taking power away from the bureaucratic structure that has essentially replaced Congress in so many areas of ruling people's lives.
Well, to be fair, I mean, Trump gave them reason to think he was like them with the multiple divorces and he wasn't particularly religious himself, and and he was in that world, and he was quite explicitly pro-choice at the time. So, he let them think, he led people to believe that he was of that world, and so that's one of the reasons they
And he
liked him.
may well have been at that point. People go through changes.
Right? People do change. So. I don't know what extent he's changed, but he is, what is it? Midge Decter said once, there comes a time to recognize the side you're on. And I think, even though some of us were kind of skeptical in 2016 that he'd have conservative policies, I think he recognized that the left was not going to have any type of cooperation with him, and his policies have certainly been more conservative than
Yes.
not.
I started supporting him in March of 2016. I publicly supported him at that point. I didn't think he was a conservative, but I thought he was a pragmatic businessman who loved America, and and I was perfectly comfortable overlooking the personal foibles and moral failings on the understanding that I'd like other people to overlook mine also.
So I have a close friend who I would say is well known in the conservative world. You know his name if I said it, but I don't want to say it on the air. He said, I have problems with Trump and I cannot bring myself to vote for him, but I'm rooting against Biden. And I think a lot of conservatives feel that way too.
Yeah. To me personally, there are values above conservatism.
Let's talk about that. So, I mean, obviously, religion is very important to me, and I keep the Jewish faith as you do, and that is probably my ultimate the thing that's most important to me. But within the political context, I look to conservatism above all in determining my vote, what I write about, where I'm going to put my support, and is that not? And we can obviously have disagreements about what conservatism is, but is that not your overriding theory, or that's not what drives you in politics?
I don't think we disagree in practice. It may be as elementary as semantic, but I know exactly what uh, Judeo-Christian biblical principles are. I'm not sure I fully understand what conservative principles. I mean, I've read Kirk and I've read Buckley and I've studied all the godfathers of conservatism, um, but I'm not sure how clear everything is. In other words, uh, is there any real clarification as to where libertarianism ends and conservatism begins? I don't think there is a clear line over there.
I mean, maybe it's not a clear line, but I think conservatism makes account for religion, family, and foreign policy, and those are things that
And
the distinctions are
to
with
that
libertarians.
extent, I would support conservatism, but I dismissed the critiques of Trump in 2016 as he's not a conservative. I thought that was largely irrelevant because he hadn't. Conservatism became an intellectual movement in a way that it was not necessarily so in Goldwater's day. And Donald Trump is not an intellectual. And for many people,
That we could certainly agree.
for many people, that's one of his big advantages
Right.
because there is a widespread and well-rooted distrust of intellectualism, I think.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting in 2016. Pretty much every conservative think tank and magazine said, we want this person, we want that person, and Trump won. And it kind of, this is someone who's in the conservative magazine and conservative think tank world. It kind of showed the hollowness of that world, that it wasn't really connected to where the voters are. And for many years, they equated what they thought with what the Republican voters were going to support. And then that wasn't necessarily the case.
I think that many of conservative thought leaders and idea generators, people who were maybe still are friends of mine, but I think they turned on Trump partially. I I do think because they realized that in a Trump world they had no influence. Trump didn't read their magazines. He didn't read their books. He didn't care about them. He was operating on a gut level, and they would never have any role to play in a Trump White House, and they didn't. And I think many people who were conservatives, and some even on that basis, in my view, left the conservative tent and joined the other guys. And I think partially it was, I think there were venal issues at stake for many people. Trump didn't need people's money and he didn't need their ideas.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction among those people. I wouldn't say they turned on Trump so much as they weren't with Trump. Some people came to support Trump. Most, I would say, within the conservative movement, certainly conservative voters. But there are some who said, okay, I so can't abide him that I'm going to support the other team, which
Mm.
I can't understand. That's just not where I am. And others said, okay, I will call balls and strikes. I'll criticize him when he does something that deviates from what I think is the right approach, but I also will be willing to support him when he does things that I do agree with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah, I mean, there are those people, the Max Boots of the world, and
yes.
Jennifer Rubin in particular, who was so gung-ho about moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem before Trump was president. And then when Trump does it, suddenly she's critical of it. And I just don't understand that. I mean,
Yeah,
supposedly you have policy ideas that you support. It shouldn't matter who supports them.
yeah, you'd think, huh?
Right.
Um, apart from your lovely family, God bless them, what is exciting you these days? What are you jumping out of bed with eagerness for?
Well, there's two things that I'd like to talk about. Number one is I've got this new book coming. It's called The Power and the Money: Epic Clashes Between Commanders in Chief and Titans of Industry. It's about CEOs and presidents and the way that they've interacted, clashed, fought over a century and a half. And it's also a story of how over that century and a half, government and big business have become increasingly enmeshed. So that if you are a CEO and you have a big company, the first thing you have to worry about is not whether you can produce the widgets you're trying to produce, not what your customer base is, but how you are going to deal with government. How is government going to either support what you're doing or get in the way of what you're trying to accomplish? And it leads a lot of CEOs to spend a lot of time in Washington, trying to spend time fundraising for politicians. And it's just a fascinating story of the development of American business over the last century and a half. That's coming out next month, and I'm really excited about it and look forward to more conversations on it.
Oh, I'd love to talk about that. Yeah. So let's talk about it as soon as it hits the shelves. And how did Bill Gates learn that lesson?
Yeah, Bill Gates definitely learned it the hard way. And I talk about him and John D. Rockefeller and how they both made the same mistake. They both built an empire when they thought government wasn't watching. They thought government couldn't do anything to them. And they both learned the hard way that you may ignore government, but government's not going to ignore you. And obviously, Standard Oil was broken up a little bit after Rockefeller retired, but he was still pretty closely affiliated with the company, and it was a hard blow to him that he had trouble talking about afterwards. And the government comes after Microsoft, and around 2000, Gates leaves the company. He says to do all the philanthropic stuff, but it was in large part because of his antagonistic relationship with the government investigation. And the new guy who came in as general counsel, this guy Brad Smith, said, "Make peace." And there's a sense that, if you want the government to stay off your back, you're going to have to do what the government wants. And
Does that always mean pay money?
no, it doesn't always mean pay money. It means establish policies that the government likes to see. That's why you see a lot of these corporations going woke, because they know it'll keep the Democratic politicians off their back, and they tend to believe that Republican politicians are less interested in coming after them. I think that's less true today. And one of the things I talk about in the book is how now both Democrats and Republicans seem to dislike and distrust corporations for a variety of reasons.
Your advice to a growing and influential business professional today: be more concerned about Congress or be more concerned about the bureaucrats of the regulatory state?
Well, I would have said the bureaucrats of the regulatory state a week ago, but now that the Chevron deference has been taken away in the Supreme Court, which I think is a good decision,
It's a wonderful decision.
It might go back to Congress. Congress might start doing its job and writing what it thinks the rules of the road are. I heard these stories about in times of Chevron deference. As you know, I served in the in government as a senior level. You would have these bureaucrats say, well, why don't we write the rules as vaguely as possible because we know the courts will be with us because of Chevron deference. Well, they can't do that anymore. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, one of the things you need in business and in life in general is regulatory certainty.
Yes.
And Chevron deference created this regulatory uncertainty where the government bureaucrats could act on a whim. So the other thing is in terms of advice, Bill Gates went to a young Mark Zuckerberg and he said to him of Washington, get an office there now. And he was telling Zuckerberg not to make the same mistake he did. And Zuckerberg did build a very powerful Washington office early on in Facebook's existence.
That is fascinating. And I remember all of that. The book comes out next month?
August 20th. Yeah. The Power of Money.
All right. Please stay in touch so we can do something on that. It's a wonderful topic. How did you get the idea of that book?
Well, as you know, I've written 5 books on the presidency. And with each book, I try to my books are about presidents and blank. And the blank is something that people haven't thought of before that is really an interesting way of a lens of looking at the presidency. So I did presidents in pop culture, presidents in infighting in the White House, presidents in disasters, presidents in intellectuals. And now I came up with this idea of CEOs because CEOs are constantly in the headlines. They're constantly in Washington. There is this new sense that both Democrats and Republicans dislike them. And where did that come from? So I decided to look into the history of presidents and CEOs and found that nobody had ever done this analysis before.
How wonderful. Which CEO had the closest and best political connections and strongest government connection?
Yeah, well, the guy I like to talk about the most perhaps is Lew Wasserman, who was a Hollywood agent, became the head of his agency.
United Artists.
Yes, and then tried to buy a studio, Universal. And when he bought Universal, Robert F. Kennedy's Justice Department came after him. Now, Wasserman had always said, I'm not interested in government. He didn't want to get involved in fundraisers, and he kind of stayed away from Washington. But suddenly he learned this lesson that Gates and Rockefeller did, which is you can ignore Washington, but Washington's not going to ignore you. And he starts befriending presidents, including Lyndon Johnson, with whom he was very close. There's a story you'll love, Rabbi, that he is doing a fundraiser for Lyndon Johnson. It has to be at the Coconut Grove, which is this place in LA that I'm sure you're familiar with, where the Academy Awards were.
Oh, I used to hang out there all the time.
I'm sure. But it has to be there. It has to be on a certain night because the president's schedule is very challenging. And when he looks into it, he finds that the Coconut Grove is not available that night. Why? because someone is having a bar mitzvah there that night. So he calls the father of the bar mitzvah boy and he says, we need the Coconut Grove that night. And, the president, the fundraiser is very important. So the guy thinks about it and he says, okay, I'll let you have the Coconut Grove that night if you let my son and me meet the president. Just fine. So then he hangs up. A few minutes later, the phone rings, and Wasserman picks up the phone again. It's the bar mitzvah boy's father again. And he says, I'm sorry to say the rabbi also has to meet the president. So anyway, so Wasserman became very close with Johnson. He also had been Ronald Reagan's agent and when Reagan was a Hollywood actor. And so he worked very closely with the Reagan administration. And then later, he identified this no-name governor of Arkansas named Bill Clinton. And he gave him advice, and then he became close with him when Clinton was president. So he really understood the levers of power. Dominic Dunn, the writer, said that Wasserman could smell power, whether it was in Hollywood, Washington, or Little Rock.
Can't wait to see the book. This is
It's really
going to be
terrific.
fun.
Yeah.
Going to be fun.
So the other thing I'm excited about, you asked me two things. The other thing is I am now teaching at Yeshiva University. I got my PhD 30 years ago, but I never before stepped foot on a college campus as a university instructor. But I felt with what's going on campuses, and I'm so disappointed in the so-called elite universities, I call them the expensive universities, that I wanted to build up Yeshiva University as an alternative. And I thought going there and teaching there, I think would be a good way to give students an understanding of Washington that maybe they weren't getting from the current faculty. And so I go up there once a week. As you know, I live in the DC area, but I go up to New York once a week, and I teach a number of classes for students there, and I'm very impressed with students.
I'm so happy to hear that. What is the course? What is it? What is the title?
I teach a number of classes.
Yeah.
I teach a health policy class.
Yeah.
I teach a class on the presidency. I also do a reading group on great Jewish political thinkers and one on great political texts.
I'm so happy to hear that. And students are stimulating and good and promising.
Yeah, and also they are earnest and they want to learn and they're grateful. And there's none of this woke stuff where I feel like I have to walk on eggshells if I misuse some student's pronoun. I just can talk to them like, I'm talking to students and I feel like I'm in the 1950s again. And it's really encouraging and inspiring. It's one of the
How wonderful. It's really terrific. I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to hear my son went there.
And was he happy with the experience?
Reasonably so. It's a number of years ago, and the institution was going through a certain amount of turbulence at the time. But he got a bachelor's degree in physics, and then he went on to medical school. Not at yeshiva, but overall, it was a very positive experience. Yes.
And did any of your daughters go to Stern?
Yes.
Because I'm teaching there as well. So.
Oh, really?
I switch back and forth between the two campuses.
Oh, how interesting! Now, what's that like?
I think they're great. The women are really terrific. They're even more earnest. They're a little more mature, and they're ready to learn. They're ready to go. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so happy that's worked out. That's terrific. Any recent articles that I've somehow missed in the Washington Examiner or Claremont or anywhere else that you've published lately?
Well, I'm working on one on the British election and how that might affect American presidents. But there was a piece that just came out this week about this guy Tyler Cherry. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a Biden White House aide who said some horrible things about Israel on social media, and he was caught. And I'm not surprised you don't know about it because it didn't get much take up in the mainstream media. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico haven't written about it at all. And so I wrote an article about other people who were White House aides who said problematic things and how they were called out in the mainstream media and eventually forced to resign. And I just talked about the contrast with these other incidents in presidential history, and suddenly this incident isn't getting much attention.
Oh, very interesting. Where will that appear?
It was in National Review this week.
It is already there?
Yeah, it's already up.
Good. I will take a look. Thank you. That's good to know. British elections today. Give me your prediction.
I think it's pretty clear that Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, is going to win. The real question is what happens to the Tories, the Conservatives. I think there's a good chance that Nigel Farage takes a lot of the Tory votes and perhaps
I happen to like him. I know him and I think a lot of him. So I do agree with you on that.
Right. And so then you wonder what's the purpose of the so-called conservative party, and because it hasn't been so conservative in recent years, and if it's just kind of labor light, who needs it? And so Farage could develop his party into the actual conservative alternative, and
It'll
so that
become
would
the
be very,
opposition. Yes,
yeah.
it could be.
Mhm.
And is that an echo of what we're seeing in France?
Yeah, look at David Frum said this thing that I thought was very interesting. He said, if only fascists will enforce immigration laws, then then the people will vote for fascists. I mean, I'm not calling them fascists anyway. I'm just saying the New York Times and the Washington Post, they're hand-wringing and they're saying, oh my gosh, look at these far right parties. It's not that they're far right, it's that they want to enforce immigration laws, and the people want those laws enforced. And so I think the mainstream media gets it wrong when they fail to understand what's going on there.
And maybe there's so many other things we could. We'll do this again, okay?
I'd love to.
But the what's in the mind of a ruler who wants to persist in bringing in the Biden supporter, the Macron's, the German who can't be unaware of the havoc that is being caused on the streets by uncontrolled immigration. What is in his head? Why is he resisting what seems to be so natural and inevitable?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wonder about it myself. But I think part of it is this sense that it's a long-term play. Well, certainly in the American context, if you let in immigrants and the Republicans are saying, "Oh, we don't want illegal immigrants in the country," then at some point these people will become naturalized, they'll become citizens, and they'll vote for your party as opposed to the other party. And we're willing to take the short-term pain of tumult in our cities in order to get that long-term gain of more voters who think like us. But you can't really predict who voters are going to be in the future. I mean, look right now, Hispanics are becoming increasingly conservative.
No, you can't tell.
Is going to get much higher
Yeah.
percentage of the black vote,
See,
than you've
I
got.
think the progressive is part of its, again, I go back to the religious belief system, but I think that the progressive mindset is essentially international, it's globalist. And there's a reason for that. Again, the Bible speaks about, in Genesis, speaks about the islands of development. Essentially, God's view of human beings is not one big international world government. It is separate countries. It is nationalism, which is one of the reasons that the word nationalist has been turned into a defamatory term. And so I think congenitally, I think their bodies reject the idea of any borders because the United Nations is the manifestation of everything that is good and promising and noble.
Right. And if you look at the United Nations, they basically get every single vote wrong.
Yes. Oh,
And so
absolutely.
who
Reliably.
wants to impose that on everybody
Yeah,
else?
yeah, reliably. All right. Last call. Does do Trump and Biden face one another in November?
I think they do. I think the only person who can determine whether Biden gets off the ticket is Biden.
Well,
He has all the
actually,
cards.
Dr. Jill Biden.
Right. But she likes being on Air Force One. She likes living with the First Lady staff and living, having a nice office in the East Wing. So the only people who could get him to stop are people whose power derives from him being in power. So they have no interest in getting him out. And the White House is such a bubble, and as you know, I've worked there. They call everybody who thinks otherwise the bedwetters, right? Everybody thinks that Biden couldn't win in 20, or the Republicans were going to take over Congress in 2022. They call those people the bedwetters. We've been right all the time, and it leads to what I call the Bob Smith fallacy. There was a guy named Bob Smith who was a senator from New Hampshire who ran for president in 2000. Everybody told him not to run. He had a bad toupee. He wasn't very good on television. There's no chance he's going to win. But he said, well, in every election I've ever run, everybody told me I was going to lose. So that means, by definition, I'm going to win this time too. And it's just wrong. But I think that's how they look at it. And I think Biden stays on the ticket. I also think from the Democrats' perspective, they're kind of better off with Biden on the ticket than what comes next, because you don't know what comes next. Let's say Gretchen Whitmer shows up and she becomes the candidate. Well, she's got a memoir coming out this week. I don't know what's in the memoir. Kristi Noem was a viable vice presidential candidate until she revealed that she shot her dog in her memoir, and suddenly she wasn't. So people who aren't vetted can't just show up. on the presidential stage and run and win office. So
Yeah.
they're kind of better off with Biden in assuming that the kind of red-blue paradigm is going to hold, and maybe Trump gets enough convictions that people reject him. I think that's a better bet for them than the unknown.
Interesting analysis, and I hear it very clearly. I should now sit down and make a list of all the things that have popped up during our conversation for us to pick up on next time. I hope I'll be disciplined enough to do that, because we've sort of opened so many doors. But anyways, I've kept you from your family. It is the 4th of July. I do hope you got hamburgers and hot dogs on the barbecue, and that you have a wonderful day. Thanks so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking, and it'll be nice if our various audiences enjoy our conversation as much as I did.
Amen. Happy birthday, America.
Absolutely. All righty. Thank you so much, Tevi. Wonderful
Thank
talking
you.
with you.
Take care.
God bless.